Me, Alex, tech lead at a mid-sized software company. I manage a back-end development team. We're not rock stars, just a solid group of guys who get things done. Our reputation in the company is that if you have a project that's complicated, on a tight deadline, and absolutely cannot fail, you give it to us. We don't do drama. We don't do office politics. We just code, solve problems, and hit our deadlines. The work environment was pretty decent for a long time. Competence was valued above all else. You did good work, you got respect. Simple as that. My senior dev, Mark, has been in the industry for over 20 years. He's seen it all. Corporate mergers, dot-com bubbles bursting, and every management fad you can imagine. He's deeply cynical, but he's the best coder I've ever worked with. A walking encyclopedia of what not to do. A few months ago, maybe half a year, the company decided it needed to modernize its culture. That was the first sign. The email from the CEO announced we had a new head of HR, Amanda. The email was full of praise about her visionary leadership and her background in transformative corporate strategy. Mark read the email over my shoulder and just grunted. Transformative. That's a $100 word for things are about to get annoying. An all-hands meeting was called to introduce her. Amanda looked exactly like you'd expect. Late 20s, maybe early 30s, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my first car. She had this intensely earnest look on her face, like she was about to save us all from ourselves. Her speech was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords. It was all about leveraging our diversity, creating psychological safety, and unpacking our unconscious biases. I looked over at my team. A couple of the younger guys were nodding along, probably because they thought they were supposed to. Mark was staring at the ceiling, looking like he was mentally calculating how many days until his retirement. I tried to keep an open mind. Maybe it was just talk. Maybe she'd just implement a few new training modules and leave us alone. I was wrong. So wrong. About a week later, the email landed. The subject line was, "Our commitment to equity, the Fair Representation Initiative." I felt a cold knot in my stomach before I even opened it. It was a long, rambling memo filled with charts and statistics about the gender gap in tech. Then came the hammer blow, a new company-wide policy, effective immediately. To foster an inclusive environment and correct historical imbalances, every project team must henceforth include at least one female member. It wasn't a guideline. It wasn't a goal to strive for. It was a mandate. No exceptions. I read it twice to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. My team was all male. Not by design, it just happened that way. Over the years, we'd hired the best candidates who applied and passed the technical interviews. Their gender was never a factor. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Mark walked over to my desk. "Let me guess, the email." I just nodded. "So, we're officially prioritizing chromosomes over competence now," he said, not even a hint of a smile on his face. "This will end well." I decided I had to say something, not in an aggressive way, but just to understand the practicalities. I scheduled a meeting with Amanda. I walked into her office. It was already redecorated, minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls, and a small sign on her desk that said, "Smash the patriarchy." Okay, it didn't really say that, but it might as well have. I sat down and tried to be diplomatic. I explained my team structure and our focus on highly specialized skills. I asked her, what happens if we have an urgent project that requires a very niche skill set, and the only qualified candidate available in time is a man? She gave me this patient, condescending smile. The kind of smile a teacher gives a child who just asked a silly question. "That's a very interesting hypothetical, Alex," she began, "but it's based on a flawed premise." She explained that the very idea of a talent shortage of women is a myth created by a system that devalues them. "The talent is out there," she said, leaning forward. "Perhaps the issue isn't the talent pool, but the way you're fishing in it. Your recruitment methods might be unintentionally biased." I tried to explain that our technical interviews were blind. We remove names and identifying info from coding tests. We literally judge based on the code and nothing else. It didn't matter. It was like talking to a wall. She said, "The data is clear. Tech has a problem with toxic masculinity, and it creates an environment where women don't feel welcome. This new policy isn't just about hiring. It's about changing the very fabric of our culture." I realized I wasn't going to win. I wasn't even playing the same game. I was talking about project logistics and hiring efficiency. She was on a crusade. I left her office feeling completely defeated. For the next month or so, things were quiet. We were finishing up an existing project, so the new rule didn't affect us directly. But I could hear whispers from other teams. A new data science project was delayed by 3 weeks because they couldn't find a female data scientist with the right security clearances. The mobile app team had to pass on a brilliant male UI/UX designer they wanted because their team was already all male. They ended up hiring a less experienced woman who was still struggling to keep up. Morale started to dip. The guys felt like their skills were being devalued. It was no longer about being the best. It was about filling a quota. Then, the big one landed. Our company won a massive contract with a huge, well-known logistics firm. It was the biggest project in our company's history. The goal was to build a brand new cutting-edge inventory and routing system from scratch. It was a monster of a project. High complexity, high stakes, and a ridiculously aggressive timeline. If we pulled it off, it would be a huge win. If we failed, the financial penalties and reputational damage would be catastrophic. My boss called me into his office. He looked nervous. "Alex, we need your team on this. You're the only ones who can handle it." I said we were up for it, but there was a catch. The client's entire existing infrastructure was built on a very old, very obscure database technology. It was a niche system that almost no one uses anymore, but the client had petabytes of data locked in it, and the new system had to integrate with it seamlessly. "We need to hire one more person," I told him, "an expert-level database architect who knows this specific system inside and out. There aren't many of them around." My boss just nodded. "Do whatever it takes. Get who you need. The budget is basically unlimited." The hunt began. Mark, using his old-school network of contacts, managed to find a guy. Let's call him the Unicorn. This guy's resume was incredible. He had 15 years of experience, and for 10 of those, he was a lead architect at the very company that created the obscure database software. He didn't just know the system. He probably wrote parts of it. He was a freelance consultant now. He was available, and he was interested. We set up a technical interview immediately. It was less of an interview and more of a masterclass. We threw the most complex, nightmarish scenarios at him, problems that would take my team days to unravel. He would listen patiently, ask a few clarifying questions, and then lay out an elegant, brilliant solution in minutes. He even pointed out flaws in our initial project plan that we had completely missed. After the interview, my entire team was buzzing. "We have to hire this guy," the junior devs were saying. I'd learned more from him in a month than in 5 years on my own. Mark, who never gives praise, just looked at me and said, "Don't mess this up, Alex. This guy is the real deal." I felt a huge wave of relief. The biggest hurdle of the project was solved. I typed up the hiring recommendation, attached his resume and our glowing interview notes, and sent it off to HR for approval. I expected a rubber stamp, a quick approved, and we could get him onboarded by the end of the week. An hour went by, then 2. My phone rang. It was Amanda. Her voice was calm and cheerful. "Hi, Alex. I'm looking at your hiring request. Very impressive resume." I started to relax. "Yeah, he's a perfect fit. We'd like to get an offer out to him today." "There's just one small problem," she said, her tone not changing at all. "Your team is all male. This candidate is a man." The cold knot was back in my stomach, but this time it was a block of ice. "Amanda, this isn't just any position," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is a highly specialized role. This person is one of maybe a dozen people in the country with this level of expertise." "I understand that," she replied. "But the policy is very clear. We need to maintain our commitment to equity. I cannot approve this hire." I couldn't believe it. I thought she might bend the rules for a project this critical. "So, what are we supposed to do?" I asked. "The project is dead in the water without this role filled." "You'll have to find a qualified female candidate," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I'm sure if you look hard enough, you'll find one. My team will be happy to assist in the search." I tried to argue. I explained the timeline, the client's expectations, the financial risks. She just kept repeating the same lines. "This is an opportunity to challenge our assumptions. We need to be leaders in cultural change." A diverse team is a stronger team. It was like a corporate speak-generating robot. No logic could get through. Finally, I gave up. So, to be crystal clear, I said, my voice dripping with frustration, you are blocking the hiring of the only suitable candidate we've found for a mission-critical role on a multi-million-dollar project because of his gender. There was a slight pause on the other end. I'm enforcing a company policy that is crucial for our long-term health and our commitment to a fair workplace, she said. The line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone, just staring into space. Mark walked up to my desk. He didn't have to ask. He saw it on my face. She said no, didn't she? I just nodded. He let out a long, slow sigh. Well, Alex, he said, turning to walk back to his own desk. Welcome to the future. The project was already in jeopardy, and we hadn't written a single line of code. I knew I couldn't just let it go. This was too important. I spent the rest of the day drafting a formal email. I laid out the entire situation in cold, hard, factual terms. The project's scope, the client's non-negotiable deadline, the critical nature of the database architect role, the extreme scarcity of the required skill set. I attached the unicorn's resume and our team's unanimous glowing technical review. Then I detailed the direct consequences of not hiring him. Project delays, potential contract breaches, and millions of dollars in penalties. I tried to make it as unemotional and business-focused as possible. This wasn't about feelings. It was about risk management. I sent the email to Amanda and CC'd my direct supervisor and his boss, the VP of engineering. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted witnesses. The response I got back from Amanda a few hours later was infuriatingly polite and completely useless. Thank you for outlining your concerns, Alex. They have been noted. The HR team is already proactively sourcing female candidates who align with the project's requirements. We are confident we can find a suitable hire who also helps us meet our diversity goals. My supervisor called me. He sounded tired. I saw the email chain, Alex. My hands are tied. Amanda has the full backing of the C-suite on this initiative. They see it as a PR win. We just have to play along. Play along? I asked, incredulous. This project is going to crash and burn. Then make sure you document everything, he said, his voice low. Every delay, every candidate you reject, every warning you give. Cover yourself. It was the most depressing advice I'd ever received. He wasn't telling me how to save the project. He was telling me how to save my own job when it inevitably failed. So, the great search began. The HR recruiters, under Amanda's direction, started throwing resumes at me. It was a joke, a sad, painful joke. The first batch of candidates were women who had database experience on their LinkedIn profiles. This apparently meant one of them had used Microsoft Access in a marketing internship 10 years ago. Another had taken a single online course in SQL. None of them had ever even heard of the specific technology we needed. I rejected them all with detailed notes explaining exactly why they were not qualified. Mark and I would review the resumes together. It became a kind of gallows humor ritual. Okay, this one lists data wizard as a skill, he'd say, deadpan. That's promising. After the first week, Amanda called me into her office again. She had a stack of the resumes I'd rejected on her desk. Alex, I'm concerned about the pattern I'm seeing here, she said, her brow furrowed with theatrical seriousness. You're rejecting every single female candidate we send you. It's starting to look like you're not giving them a fair chance. I took a deep breath. Amanda, have you read my notes? These candidates are not remotely qualified. We need a specialist in a very specific, very rare technology. This is like needing a heart surgeon and you're sending me people who've taken a first aid course. She waved her hand dismissively. You're too focused on years of experience, she said. That's a classic example of bias. It favors older candidates who are predominantly male. We should be looking for potential, raw talent, someone we can mentor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mentor? We don't have time to mentor someone. The project timeline is 6 months. It would take a junior person 5 years just to get up to speed on this system, assuming they were a genius. The client expects an expert on day one. Perhaps the client's expectations are also part of the problem, she mused. Maybe we need to educate them on our commitment to building a more equitable workforce. I just stared at her. She was in a completely different reality. A magical land where multi-million-dollar contracts could be put on hold for social experiments. The search dragged on. 2 weeks had now passed since we found the unicorn. The project's initial planning phase was stalled. We were already falling behind schedule. The client's project manager was starting to send polite but firm emails. Just checking in on the staffing for the database architect role. Do we have an ETA? I had to give them vague corporate non-answers. We are in the final stages of the recruitment process. I felt like a liar. Then, one afternoon, an HR recruiter sent over a resume with an excited note. I think this is the one. She has experience with the right company. I opened the file. The candidate had indeed worked at the company that made the database software. My hopes rose for a fraction of a second. Then I read her job title, Junior Sales Associate. She had worked there for 9 months, 5 years ago, in the sales department. I felt my will to live just drain away. I forwarded the email to Mark with no comment. His reply came back 30 seconds later. Tell me this is a prank. This became the new low. HR was now just doing keyword searches for the company name and sending over anyone who matched, regardless of their role. The project was now almost a month behind. The pressure was mounting. The client was no longer being polite. They were demanding daily status updates on the hiring process. My team was getting demoralized. They came to work every day knowing that the project they were assigned to was doomed before it even started. I was working 12-hour days, spending half my time doing my actual job and the other half dealing with this HR nightmare, writing reports and documenting every failure. Finally, Amanda scheduled another meeting. "We've found a very promising candidate," she announced. "I've fast-tracked her through the initial screening, and I want your team to interview her tomorrow." She seemed incredibly proud of herself, like she had single-handedly solved the entire problem. "She may not have the exact long-term experience you were looking for," she admitted, "but she's a fast learner with a fantastic attitude. She's exactly the kind of person we should be investing in." The candidate's resume was thin. She was a recent graduate. She had a computer science degree from a decent university, which was a start. Her work experience consisted of a single 6-month internship at a web design agency where she worked on front-end stuff. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, related to enterprise-level databases, let alone the ancient arcane system we were dealing with. I knew it was a waste of time, but I had no choice. I had to follow the process. The next day we held the technical interview. It was me, Mark, and another one of our senior engineers. The candidate was a young woman who seemed nice enough. She was clearly nervous. We started with some basic warm-up questions about computer science fundamentals. She did okay on those. Then we slowly ramped up the difficulty, moving toward database concepts. It became clear very quickly that she was out of her depth. We asked her about data normalization. She gave a vague textbook definition, but couldn't explain how to apply it in a practical scenario. We asked her about indexing strategies for large data sets. She had no idea. Finally, Mark asked the killer question, very gently. "Have you ever worked with the obscure database name system before?" She looked confused. I don't think I've heard of that one. Is it like MySQL?" The interview was over. We spent another 10 minutes asking some softball questions just to avoid ending the call abruptly and making her feel bad. After she disconnected, the three of us just sat there in silence for a full minute. Mark finally broke it. "So, that's the one. The person Amanda fast-tracked. The savior of our project." He wasn't angry. He just sounded tired, profoundly tired. I wrote up the interview feedback. I was professional, but I was blunt. Candidate demonstrates a fundamental lack of knowledge in core database architecture principles. She has zero experience with the required technology. Hiring her for this role would be an act of professional negligence and would guarantee the failure of the project. She is, without question, the least qualified candidate we have ever interviewed for a senior position. I sent it off. I expected another argument, another lecture about my bias. But what happened next was even crazier. Amanda called me. She wasn't angry, she was ecstatic. "I knew it," she said. "I knew she had potential." I was completely baffled. "Amanda, did you read my feedback? We gave her a strong no hire." "Oh, that," she said, laughing it off. "Your technical evaluations are just one part of a holistic assessment, Alex." She did wonderfully on the cultural fit portion of her interview with my team. She's passionate about our company's mission and our diversity goals. My blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" I'm saying I'm extending an offer to her, she announced proudly. She's accepted. She'll be joining your team as the new senior database architect, starting Monday. I was speechless. She had gone completely over my head. She had ignored the unanimous expert opinion of the technical team and hired someone totally unqualified, just to check a box. She was going to force this poor, clueless recent grad into a senior role on the most complex project in the company. She was setting her up for a spectacular, public failure, and she was taking all of us down with her. "You can't do this," I finally managed to say. "It's already done," she said, her voice full of smug finality. "I expect you and your team to provide her with a warm and welcoming onboarding experience. It's important that she feels supported." I hung up the phone. I walked out of my office and over to Mark's desk. He looked up at me. "Don't tell me," he said. "She hired her." Mark didn't say a word. He just slowly, deliberately closed his laptop. He stood up, put on his jacket, and looked at me. "I'm going home, Alex. I think I'm coming down with a case of I don't get paid enough for this." And he walked out. I stood there in the middle of the office, surrounded by the quiet hum of servers. The project was no longer in jeopardy. It was officially dead. It was just a matter of how long it would take for everyone else to realize it. That weekend was one of the worst of my career. I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversations in my head, trying to find a move I had missed, a different argument I could have made. But there was nothing. I had been logical. I had been professional. I had documented everything. The system wasn't just broken, it was actively working against us. On Monday morning, the new hire arrived. Amanda personally walked her over to our team area, beaming like she had just brokered world peace. "Everyone, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to our new senior database architect," she announced to the team. "My guys are professionals." They stood up, shook her hand, and introduced themselves. No one was rude, but the atmosphere was thick with a tense, awkward silence. The young woman herself looked terrified. She knew she was in over her head. You could see it in her eyes. She was a lamb being led to the slaughter, and I almost felt sorry for her. Amanda had thrown her into an impossible situation just to prove a point. I took her to her desk and decided to try and make the best of it. Maybe, just maybe, if we gave her the simplest possible tasks, she could at least offload some minor work. I assigned her the first task: document the existing data schema from a sample backup the client had provided. It was a tedious but straightforward job. It required no new architecture, just careful observation and notation. I explained it to her slowly and clearly. I asked her if she had any questions. She just shook her head, looking overwhelmed. Hours went by. I saw her staring at the screen, not typing anything. By the end of the day, she had produced a single page of notes that were mostly incorrect. She had misidentified primary keys and misunderstood basic table relationships. It was worse than I thought. She didn't just lack the specialized knowledge, she was missing some of the fundamentals. Mark, who had come back to work looking grim, didn't say a word about it. He just saw the document on my screen, shook his head, and went back to his work. The rest of the week was a slow-motion disaster. We couldn't give her any real work on the new system, because she didn't have the foundational knowledge to contribute. Every task we assigned her, no matter how simple, either came back wrong or didn't come back at all. She spent most of her days sitting at her desk, quietly panicking. My other team members had to spend their own valuable time trying to handhold her, or, more often, redoing her work from scratch. She wasn't a team member, she was a bottleneck, a full-time, high-salary intern who was occupying a seat meant for a world-class expert. The client was getting furious. The project was now over a month behind schedule. The first major milestone, a proof-of-concept prototype, was due in a week, and we were nowhere near ready. The client's project manager was now on a daily call with me, and his tone had shifted from concerned to openly hostile. "We were told the architect role was filled over a week ago," he said during one call, his voice dripping with anger. "Why are we seeing zero progress on the data layer? What is your new architect doing?" I was out of excuses. I couldn't tell him the truth, that our HR department had forced us to hire a completely unqualified person. So, I just had to take the heat. We're experiencing some unexpected integration challenges. It was a lie, and he knew it. The breaking point came at the end of the second week. The client's CTO sent a one-line email to our CEO. "We need an emergency meeting to discuss the future of this project, tomorrow." The The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the main boardroom. The invite list was small and serious. Our CEO, the CFO, the VP of Engineering, Amanda, and me. From the client side, their CTO and their lead project manager. I walked into that room with a heavy briefcase containing a thick binder, my paper trail. The client didn't waste any time on pleasantries. Their CTO, a stern-looking man in his 60s, started speaking before everyone was even seated. He laid out the timeline of failure, every missed deadline, every delayed deliverable. We signed a multi-million-dollar contract with you based on your reputation for excellence and efficiency, he said, his eyes fixed on our CEO. What we have received is 2 months of delays, evasions, and incompetence. He then looked directly at me. Your project manager tells us the database architect role was filled. We have seen no evidence of any work being done by this person. Who is this person, and what is their qualification? Our CEO turned to me, his face pale. Alex, before I could speak, Amanda jumped in. She launched into a pre-rehearsed speech, full of confidence and corporate jargon. She talked about how our company was investing in new talent profiles and building teams for the future. She explained that my team was undergoing a cultural shift and was learning to adapt to a more diverse and collaborative workflow. She was essentially blaming me and my team for not being supportive enough of the new hire. The client's CTO was not impressed. He looked at her with utter contempt. I don't care about your corporate culture speeches, he said, his voice dangerously low. I care about the world-class logistics system you promised to build for me, a system that is currently dead on arrival. I'm asking a simple question. Who did you hire? The CEO looked at me again, his expression now a mixture of panic and anger. Alex, answer the man. This was it. The moment of truth. I opened my briefcase and took out the binder. I opened it on the table. I spoke calmly and factually. 2 months ago, my team identified and interviewed a candidate. I began. He is arguably one of the top 5 experts in the world on the required technology. Here is his resume. Here is our unanimous strong hire recommendation from the technical panel. I slid the papers across the table. This hire was blocked by HR, I continued, looking directly at Amanda. The reason given was that the candidate was male, and my team did not meet the new gender quota policy. Amanda started to protest. Now, that's a mischaracterization. Our CEO shot her a look that could curdle milk. Let him finish. I pushed another document across the table. This is the official email from HR forbidding me from making an offer to the qualified candidate. Then another. This is the detailed risk assessment I sent to HR and my superiors, warning them that this decision would jeopardize the project. It was ignored. I kept going. I presented the resumes of all the unqualified female candidates we were forced to interview. I presented our detailed feedback, explaining why each one was unsuitable. Finally, I got to the last set of documents. And this, I said, my voice cold as ice, is the resume of the candidate HR hired against the unanimous recommendation of the entire engineering team. And this is our technical interview report, which clearly states she possesses none of the required skills for the role. She was hired anyway. There was a dead silence in the room. The client's CTO slowly picked up the papers. He read the unicorn's resume, then he read the resume of the person we hired. He looked from one to the other. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just got very, very calm. He placed the papers down neatly, looked our CEO in the eye and said, "So you torpedoed our project, violated our contract, and wasted 2 months of our time because you wanted to play social justice warrior with your hiring practices." He stood up. "The contract is terminated, effective immediately. Our legal department will be in touch regarding the breach of contract penalties. We're done here." And with that, he and his project manager walked out of the room. The silence they left behind was deafening. Our CEO just sat there, staring at the empty chairs. The CFO was frantically typing on his phone, probably calculating the financial fallout. Amanda was white as a sheet. She looked like she was going to be sick. She finally found her voice, a pathetic squeak. It was about the long-term strategic vision. The CEO slowly turned his head to look at her. I had never seen such a look of pure, cold fury on anyone's face. "Amanda," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "get out of my boardroom. "Get out of my company. You are fired. Security will escort you from the building." She just stared at him, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. "Now," he said. She stumbled out of the room. The next day, a quiet memo went out. The Fair Representation Initiative was suspended indefinitely, pending a full review. The company had to pay a massive penalty to the client. The story leaked to a few industry blogs, and our reputation took a major hit. We lost 2 other potential clients who got spooked. We did end up hiring the unicorn. We had to offer him an apology and a 25% salary bump to get him back, as he'd already taken another offer. We never salvaged the big project, but he helped us clean up some other internal messes. The young woman who was hired, she quit a week after the big meeting. I can't blame her. She sent me a short email apologizing, saying she knew she wasn't ready. I wrote back and told her it wasn't her fault, and I wished her luck. She was just a pawn in Amanda's game. A few months later, things are mostly back to normal. We hire based on merit again. The business is slowly recovering. Sometimes when we're having a beer after work, Mark will bring it up. "Remember the great diversity experiment?" he'll ask with a wry smile. "I try not to," I'll say. "We learned a valuable lesson. Reality doesn't care about your ideology. Gravity works whether you believe in it or not. And in the world of engineering, competence is the only thing that works too. Anything else is just a recipe for disaster."